You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. More than 30 years ago, in 1986, my younger sister, Cathy Thomas, a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, was murdered together with her girlfriend, Rebecca Dowski, a senior at William and Mary. 10 years ago, after the FBI lost control of 78 highly graphic crime scene photos, I became much more involved in what many people refer to as the Colonial Parkway murders. I've now become the de facto leader, 8 families who lost loved ones in the Colonial Parkway murders. 4 couples murdered, approximately 1 couple a year over a 3-year period. I'm now working on a book on the Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator, together with Kristin Dilley, of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, a victim's advocate, and I have a lifelong interest in true crime.
I'm Bill Thomas.
And I'm Kristin Dilley.
So here we are on Super Bowl Sunday. It's, what did you say, sunny and in the 50s in Williamsburg?
Sunny and 50s in Williamsburg, yes.
And cold and kind of snowy here.
Which is better than where you are.
In Connecticut. So before we get started, we just wanted to thank everybody for your support. We have been completely blown away by the amount of support that we've gotten here at Mind Over Murder. We have almost 6,500 downloads of our first 2 episodes and our promo, and we cannot thank you enough for your support.
We do want to make sure that you know that reviews and ratings are very important for a new podcast. So if you can please take the time to write a review for us on your preferred podcast platform, our social media manager, Ziggy Stardust, will certainly enjoy looking at them, as will I.
Our Northeast Tech support, Oliver Wendell Weiner, the good dachshund, is demanding equal time. So he will be showing up in our social media feed very, very soon.
He is very handsome, and I know he has a lot of wonderful, artful poses to offer. So looking forward to seeing Oliver on our social media feeds.
As a long-haired dachshund, he's fully entitled to hair and makeup. And we are shooting digitally, but then he's being heavily retouched just for this particular photo series. So, this is something to look forward to for next week.
I just have to say, though, Ziggy is so perfect. He doesn't need hair or makeup. He just, arrives glamorous. He arrives fabulous.
There's no question about it, but the sad thing
throwing
is
that out there.
Your cat hates me, so there's that.
He doesn't hate you. Exactly.
Okay. I was down at your house for, 4 days recording our first series of podcasts, and the cat didn't come out once.
He's shy. He doesn't hate you. He's just shy.
Okay. There's a thin line between shy and hate. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, I suppose that we could debate that. We'll just see if next time he comes out and hangs out. He probably will.
I look forward
to it.
Now that
he's, we do want to mention for this upcoming episode that this case that Bill is about to talk to you about does highlight a number of the pitfalls and issues that come as a result of anonymous chat apps like Kik. We hope that the teens and the parents listening will take notes.
Yes, please do. This starts a 2-parter on the solved homicide of Nicole Lovell, a 13-year-old girl in Blacksburg, Virginia, January 2016. So it's actually just past the 4th anniversary of her death. We hope you'll find it interesting. And once again, thanks for joining us on Mind Over Murder.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. Today we'll be talking about the 2016 murder of 13-year-old Nicole Lovell by college students David Eisenhower and Natalie Keepers.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder.
Setting for this case that we're talking about today is a place that has already seen an inordinate amount of tragedy. Blacksburg, Virginia, home of Virginia Tech. Now, if you listen to our last episode on Heidi Childs and David Metzler, you'll remember that they were murdered in 2009.
Of this mass murder, I think it was the greatest mass murder in the history of the United States.
And that has since been superseded by Pulse nightclub shooting.
We're not here to debate gun control or what steps we as a country need to take to reduce the level of gun violence. But I think it would probably become clear, and I think any reasonable person could support the idea that we need to take some steps because on a lot of levels, this 2007 murder at Virginia Tech has almost been forgotten because we've had so many other shootings of a similar nature in the, 12 or so years since.
As someone who teaches for a living, it is certainly something that is on my mind, especially since Parkland. I think it is on every teacher's mind to a certain extent or another, because we do have our lockdown drills. There are a certain number that are actually mandated for anybody who doesn't teach. We do have a certain number of mandated ones that we do per semester. And every time that you have them, it's really quite terrifying. If you think that we don't need to do something about gun control in this country, then do go talk to a teacher or a student or really anybody who is in school, no matter what their age, and ask them how they feel about their mass shooting drills.
The idea of a school shooter drill, I've been around long enough to remember that we used to do air raid drills, and we would sit under the desk to prepare for, and believe it or not, an atomic attack or an air raid, which seems so archaic. I feel like I'm 1,000 years old. And yet at the same time, as a father, the idea of school shooter drills, this is not something that was common until the last decade or so. And Kristin, I'd like you to comment about how your students have reacted to these school shooter drills.
It's interesting. This is something that they grew up with. Even when I was in school, we didn't have school shooter drills. Columbine happened my senior year in high school, and that was certainly something that we hoped was going to be just a fluke one-off event and that we would never see anything like that happen again. My students have grown up with this idea of school shooter drills from elementary school forward. I've been teaching 12 years now, and every year of my teaching career has been the same thing. We know we have school shooter drills. To the point of Parkland in 2017, I think it was. Gosh, it all blurs together.
They all start to blur together.
It does. It was something that the kids, they knew they had to do, just exactly like we have fire drills and tornado drills and earthquake drills. And for anybody who doesn't currently go to school, yes, we do have all those drills. Every single year, it's mandated. We have to do an earthquake drill. Kids knew this is just something that we do. We have to practice it. But after Parkland, it took on a very different tenor, especially because our school decided to make some changes to how we went about those drills. Kids started taking it much more seriously. It used to be the rules are you're in the back of the room, you're in the safest space you can possibly get to, you're in a corner where a gunman can't see you if they come through the door. Your phone is off, you're completely silent. And it used to be you'd get some giggles, you'd get kids trying to sneak onto their phone. Now, none of that. It is dead silent every time. Kids are off their phone every time. Kids are looking for the best place to hide in the room because we tell them you have to treat it like it's real every single time because you just don't know if it's real or not.
If I'm not mistaken, much like fire drills, and again, we were worried about fires and atomic attacks way back when I was a kid. My understanding is that they don't advance notice the shooter drills. In other words, they just happen.
Sometimes they will announce we are having an active shooter drill in 5 minutes. Sometimes they will not. The first unannounced drill that we had after Parkland was terrifying for everybody because we just didn't know what was happening. And so they made a point for the next couple of drills after that to announce ahead of time, we will be having a shooter drill, or it's called a lockdown drill. It's not called a shooter drill. That would be awful. Mm-hmm. We are having a lockdown drill in the next couple of minutes. And that helped it sort of ease the anxiety quite a bit because first one after Parkland, it was, I've been trained. I know what to do. I know how to shut up my classroom and keep my kids safe. I know how to lock my door and, move my eye station in front of it so that it's barricaded completely. But so I can do this on autopilot at this point, as sad a commentary as that might be. It was still the most terrifying thing right after Parkland.
Let's move back to 2007 then.
Absolutely.
To Blacksburg and this mass shooting at Virginia Tech.
I can't even imagine the amount of trauma that community underwent after all was said and done. What a terrible trauma to go through, and trying to rebuild after that. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for them and really how brave and resilient you have to be to continue to come back to Virginia Tech. Do you remember doing some research for the Heidi Childs and David Metzler piece? And Heidi's mom had said to her, "Aren't you afraid to go to Virginia Tech after what happened?" And Heidi said something to the effect of, "Oh, Mom, if it's time to go, it's your time to go. I don't worry about that. I'm not scared of that." But gosh, that has to be on everybody's mind once something like that happens in a community.
And as it turns out, that was not the last time that tragedy was going to touch the Blacksburg and Virginia Tech community.
No, not at all. And, doing research about this, I was shocked at the number of incidences of white violent crime that happened in the tech community after the 2007 massacre. So nearly 2 years after that massacre came a crime that very few people seem to remember it, even though it was incredibly shocking. And Bill, I think you hadn't even heard of it when I mentioned it to you.
No. Now, for the listeners' benefit, Kristin lives in Virginia. I lived on the West Coast in Los Angeles for the last 12 years or so, and then we recently relocated to Connecticut. I don't live here in Virginia, where we are now, but I didn't have any familiarity with this case, so tell us a little bit about it.
So in 2009, there was a grad student, Xing Yang, was having coffee in a campus cafe with a doctoral student named, again, forgive me, Hayang Zhu, when he attacked her with a kitchen knife and ultimately decapitated her.
This is on campus.
This is on campus.
In a coffee shop.
In a coffee shop.
At Virginia Tech.
Yes.
During the day with other people around, apparently.
Apparently. And this was, apparently this was a result of she had turned him down as a potential romantic partner.
Right.
And allegedly this had spurred this truly heinous crime. I can't even wrap my mind around it.
There's a pretty small Asian American population at Tech, as we understand it.
They said somewhere around 500 at that point.
But out of a community of 30,000 plus students.
Yeah, it's a small community.
It's a pretty small community, and our understanding is that it's a pretty supportive community, given the fact that it's only 500 or so students among 30,000. So this guy was romantically interested in this woman, and she rejected him. Yeah. And it ends up in not just murder, but almost like a public execution.
It's horribly tragic. And in fact, when I was doing some research on this, it turns out because that population is so small and they are so supportive of each other, he was actually listed as her emergency contact on her campus forums because there are so few people in that community that when they all needed to reach out and support each other, they listed each other as the person to call if they needed help. What a terrible, awful thing to happen. And I was living on the West Coast when this happened. I was in Arizona, I guess not technically the West Coast, Southwest.
Getting closer.
Getting a little closer. So I don't remember hearing about this specifically. I don't know how much press it got locally, but gosh, what an utterly shocking thing to happen on this campus that had just been rocked 2 years earlier by an equally intense amount of violence.
I was living in Los Angeles at this time, and unlike the Virginia Tech shooting 2 years before, which had gotten a significant amount of publicity, I mean, it was a national story, and there was a great deal of discussion about, what had happened, how could it have been prevented, that kind of thing. This murder wasn't even a blip on the radar in my busy professional world in Los Angeles until you began researching, the recent history of Virginia Tech from a crime perspective. In other words, we are fully aware of the fact that Tech is an amazing, vibrant community with a challenging academic program, a lot of really, really smart people attending undergrad and grad school there. Big sports tradition, the Hokies.
Yep, go Hokies. My dad is a huge fan.
I only recently discovered that a Hokie is actually a turkey.
Yes. The Hokie bird, yes.
I never knew that. Here we are again with this community being touched by an extreme level of violence.
Absolutely. It really does kind of boggle your mind. But then, as I continued that research that you were talking about, 8 months after that was the murder of Heidi Childs and David Metzler.
Wow. This is amazing. It's like one thing after another. And, as a longtime public relations, marketing, communications guy, this is sort of, I would imagine, every college administrator's worst nightmare.
Oh, my God. Can you even imagine?
One tragedy stacked upon the next.
And by the way, we are not in any way implying the correlation of all these events is in any way related to the cause of it is not Virginia Tech. It's not the environment. We are not in any way trying to say that Tech is a bad place or that if you go to Tech, you're more likely to be a victim of crime. We're not saying that at all. It is just very odd that these things happen to this community in that span of time.
By all accounts, Blacksburg is this beautiful, bucolic setting in the southwest corner of Virginia with a close-knit community. And as we talked about in our previous episode, Blacksburg is very much a college town. Percentage-wise, in terms of the population and the economic drivers of the community, Virginia Tech is essential to Blacksburg's economy. Many, many people, tens of thousands, who are in that area are directly involved with or supported by the vibrant community that is Virginia Tech. But for instance, for me, having spent 16 years in New York and then 12 years in Los Angeles, these are major metropolitan areas with millions upon millions of people. And, there's crime in major cities and rural areas alike. Blip in Blacksburg is really striking, particularly when Kristin went back and took a look at the last 10, 12 years of Blacksburg's history. It's very striking.
2 months after Heidi and David were murdered, we again have a tragedy that strikes at the heart of the Virginia Tech community. And this is a case that I know most of our listeners will have heard of. 2 months after Heidi and David were murdered, Virginia Tech student Morgan Harrington went to a concert in Charlottesville at the John Paul Jones Arena, and she was abducted and murdered by serial killer Jesse Matthew.
Now, this is a case that at the time was sometimes connected just by people asking questions, and it was certainly mentioned in the media. When Morgan Harrington disappeared, people asked, could this be connected to the Colonial Parkway murders? Now, admittedly, Colonial Parkway murders had started 23 years prior, so a lot of time had elapsed. I think the fact that Morgan was a lovely young woman and this disappearance of, a very attractive, vibrant, young college student from Tech visiting Charlottesville for this Metallica concert, people began talking, could this be connected? And so Colonial Parkway murders came up, the Route 29 stalker case involving Elisa Showalter Reynolds' death, and other cases started to come up in conversation. Newspapers, the internet, local television. People were starting to ask a lot of questions about young high school and college age victims and what was going on here. Actually, during this time, I reached out to Morgan Harrington's parents.
That's right. You do know them.
Introduced myself, and I remember talking to Dan Harrington and asking him if he wanted any advice, because at that point, we'd been at it for 23 years. And, we ended up having some very good phone and internet conversations. We've still never met face to face. We're always hoping to do that, and I'm sure we will at some point. They've certainly asked me to dinner more than once, and I'd like to accept the invitation at some point. But keeping in mind, I didn't live here. I was on the West Coast at the time. But there was a lot of conversation about, what's going on with unsolved murders in Virginia, and this 2009 timeframe kind of, and these several unsolved murders, at that time got a lot of people talking.
Very scary time for people all across Virginia and, of course, for the Tech community. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, 2 years later, so in 2011, one more particularly violent crime at the heart of the Tech community. Virginia Tech student Ross Truitt Ashley, who also attended Radford part-time, shot and killed a Tech police officer named Derek Krause and then killed himself.
Do we know what the cause of this act of violence might be?
He had been involved in an armed robbery a day earlier. He had stolen a Mercedes at gunpoint. The motivation for all of this, for why he would gun down this Tech police officer, quite inscrutable. For many days afterward, you had people in the Tech community who were just, what in the world? Why did this happen? How could this have happened again here in our community?
And this case is another one that I don't remember getting a lot of publicity.
I don't either. But again, I think it's kind of based in the concept of what you said earlier. If you're a college administrator at this point and you were trying to keep your school out of the news, you've got to be tearing your hair out at this point going, what is going on here? Do I have to do more damage control again? This is crazy.
But there's no way around the fact that in this example, perpetrator is a Virginia Tech student, And the victim is an officer on the police force, part of Virginia Tech's security.
Yes. And Virginia Tech, for anybody who's not familiar, Virginia Tech is practically a small city unto itself. I mean, it is a lot of students. It covers a lot of ground. And you do need to have your own Virginia Tech police force, in addition to the Blacksburg police, both of which do an excellent.
But Officer Krause, we don't know if Officer Krause was involved in investigating this, essentially a carjacking.
No, not that I'm aware
that had happened the day prior. These two events appear to be related. And then a suicide follows.
Another just terrible tragedy stacked on top of tragedy, stacked on top of tragedy for the tech community. Again, when you look at them individually, it doesn't seem more than just, well, this is a community. It's had a crime happen to it. It's had an act of violence happen to it. It's not a big deal. Until when I started researching, I looked and I noticed, oh my God, what a terrible, strange string of events that have happened in this very, very small, relatively short amount of time in a small area.
So at the risk of piling on, we have another case that we need to add to the lexicon of sad events that surround Blacksburg.
Yeah, and this one just makes my blood boil. And I know that we were talking about this a little bit last night about how upsetting and just mystifying this whole entire thing is.
You have to picture the two of us, making notes and reading stories and watching news clips and that sort of thing. And then sometimes, you've got two laptops going and one person's calling out to the other. The details of this case are pretty heinous. And this is one of those cases that I think probably any sane person would find very disturbing. And I think in particular, parents and young people should probably listen to this story because there's a cautionary tale mixed in here. But it's highly disturbing.
It truly is. And in addition to all of that research that was going on last night, there was also a certain amount of swearing to go with all of this because it is so tragic and so upsetting. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the case of Nicole Madison Lovell. So Nicole Madison Lovell was 13 years old. She was a 7th grader at Blacksburg Middle School. She was called Coley by her family. She loved panda bears. She loved the Minions characters from Despicable Me. And let it be noted, please, that my esteemed co-host, Mr. Thomas, has never seen Despicable Me.
I promise I will see the movie. I understand it's great.
I should certainly hope you will. It is excellent. Like most tweens and teens, Nicole had a very active online social life. She was using multiple apps and multiple platforms to communicate with the rest of the world. But her social media posts do indicate that she was very lonely, very unhappy. One of her Facebook posts states, "Nobody loves me." And another actually stated a desire to commit suicide. So she was a very, very unhappy 13-year-old.
Yeah, she sounds very troubled. She had been born with a damaged liver and had had surgery as a child, which resulted in scarring on her neck and on her torso. Apparently, kids were very cruel, particularly in gym class and places where her body would have been exposed. And so she really felt isolated and kind of estranged from her peers.
She also had suffered from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when she was 4. So this girl is a fighter. I mean, she really, she fought hard to live and survive. And so, by 13, she was unhappy because of the bullying that she was undergoing at Blacksburg Middle School. Still, what an amazing girl to have fought as hard as she did. Her family clearly loved her. And, she was doing the best that she could to develop friendships online. She developed a friendship with a Virginia Tech student named David Eisenhower, starting on a website called Omegle. And Bill, when we went on Omegle last night, just to take a look at what this place, at what this thing was, it was pretty interesting.
It's pretty shocking when you go to Omegle, which is a social media platform I was less familiar with. Right there on the homepage, 4 sentences in, it warns you that predators lurk on Omegle's pages. And, look, if I sound like a dad, I am a dad. My son's a senior in college now, but the idea that Omegle offers a caution in sentence 4 of their introduction, which says predators lurk here, I think why not just say it? This place is worthless, and from my perspective, it should be shut down. Why set up opportunities for sexual predators to go out and take advantage of young kids? And I usually say young women or young men, but one of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helped solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com. Do you like our show, Mind Over Murder, and want to create your own podcast?
Well then, let us tell you about Anchor.
First of all, it's free. And who doesn't love free, right?
I like free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
You can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before.
Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more platforms.
And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
I like the sound of that. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Right here, Anchor.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your own podcast.
You can tell them Kristin and Bill from Mind Over Murder sent you. Nicole Madison Lovell is a girl. I mean, she's a child.
She's a kid.
She's 13 years old, and she looks to be 13 years old.
Yes, she does. Yeah, very, very much. We do want to make clear what the Omegle site is for. According to Omegle, it's an online website that is a great way to meet new friends. They say that Omegle picks strangers at random and then allows users to talk to each other one-on-one.
And who decided this was a good idea? I love meeting people and I love meeting new people, but at least if you meet somebody in person, let's say, I'm a big coffee person. If you meet somebody at the coffee shop and then start to engage in conversation, you're at least able to look at them and evaluate a bit about who they are, how old are they who they say they are? In other words, someone can say, my name is Joe or Jane, and their name might not be Joe or Jane, but you are able to evaluate, is this person an immediate threat? In other words, I think all of us that live in the modern world have developed enough personal radar that if someone seems off somehow, we can decide maybe this isn't the time to have that conversation at the coffee shop or what have you. And if you're 13 years old, you're able to tell if someone is your peer and looks like somebody that might go to Blacksburg Middle School with you or not. And what's missing in the online environment is that there are a ton of people, and the proprietors of these websites admit this, that people are presenting as something that they're not. Sometimes they're not women or men. They're not boys or girls. I don't use that boy or girl expression very often. And there are often people who are claiming to be dramatically younger than their real age. So you have grown, let's be honest, men posing as young boys or girls in order to ensnare people like Nicole into conversations that are inappropriate. There's just no way around it.
Now, David didn't present himself that we're aware of as any age other than what he was, but Nicole did say that she was 16 or 17 years old. David, figuring that he had met someone of his own peer group, asked if they could switch over to Kik, which is another chat app that I am not familiar with. I should be. As a teacher, I know that my students use a ton of different apps that I have very little familiarity with. They can rattle off lists of things that they're using at this point. I had to have a kid explain to me what TikTok was the other day. I know that makes me sound old.
You're not missing a thing.
I told my student, I said, TikTok is a song by Kesha, isn't it? And they rolled their eyes and said, oh my God, Miss Dilley, no.
And here you were thinking you were so young and hip.
Oh no! I was never hip. I have never made any statement to that effect. Not hip, not ever. But yeah, I have definitely reached old at this point.
Oh, come on! You're a lot younger than I am, and that's important. I don't want to move too quickly past the fact that Nicole did present herself as older than she was, which is deceptive, but she was still presenting herself as marginally underage. And David Eisenhower was 18 years old.
Yeah, correct.
So he is of age. She's initially presenting herself online, this is before they met, as 16 or 17. It's probably still borderline inappropriate.
Yeah, I would
Certainly,
say so.
When he found out she was 13, it's a whole different story. So they transition then from Omegle to Kik, K-I-K. And these, by the way, are apps, as Kristin's saying, that all of us as parents should be familiar with.
David was using a username that would have given me some red flags at that point. His username on Kik was Dr. Tombstone, with an underscore between Doctor and Tombstone. And that username showed up all over her Kik app when police went back in to try to unravel her online life. So we know she spent a lot of time talking to him.
Let the podcast reflect. I'm sitting here shaking my head.
And rolling your eyes, too.
Yeah. And so Dr. Tombstones, do I have that right?
Dr. Tombstone
was his handle on Kik. And what's the premise of Kik?
It's just an instant messaging app, but you are able to message other people on it anonymously. And so this is something that, whereas, for example, a parent might be able to check out who you're messaging on Facebook Messenger, this is something that a teenager or a tween could use without their parent knowing what they're doing.
Which is exactly the point. Look, we understand that people are using Facebook and WhatsApp and lots of other social media applications as a way of communicating. But Kik seems specifically designed for anonymity.
It's never a good thing.
Well, if you're 18 or over, it's probably fine. If you're 13, like Nicole was, it's clearly problematic.
So she and David communicated for a number of months. And we know that they did meet at least once in person before the night of January 27th. On the night of January 26th, into the 27th, we know that she disappeared sometime between 9 and midnight. He pulled up outside of her Lantern Ridge home in his car and asked her to come outside because he wanted to take her on a secret date.
Now, they'd had contact previously, and it appears they may have had sexual contact. Well, let's be clear here. Nicole is 13 years old and looks 13. In other words,
she looks very young.
And he even said at trial that he thought she looked 11. And yet this college freshman, who's 18 years old, is still moving forward with having at least one and probably more prior meetings with this young woman, here I am calling her a woman when she's really a child. And he admitted that she looked 11 years old. And still this thing proceeded.
Let's call this what this is. Okay, let's call him what he is. He is a sexual predator. He is a sexual predator.
Our friend Jim Clementi, who worked in the Crimes Against Children division of the FBI, BAU, the Behavioral Analysis Unit, has spent his career on this. And boy, if anybody thinks I'm getting righteous, I'm sure we'll ask Jim to appear in a future episode of Mind Over Murder. And, we've spent a lot of time with Jim. He's an amazing man, but you want to hear somebody that gets really, really passionate about something being wrong. It's this kind of sexual contact.
Absolutely. It is beyond the pale that he would decide, looking at a girl who he knew to be, at this point, he knew to be underage, looking at a girl who he said looked 11 and still deciding to continue with this relationship it boggles the mind. I don't have words. I am not a parent, but I am a teacher, and I am very protective of my students. And this just makes me so angry. It makes my blood boil.
So there's another player who, to say that she's in the background is probably not fair enough, because she really seems to be driving the agenda here. Tell us a little bit about her.
Sure. So David Eisenhower had a friend by the name of Natalie Keepers, and she was also a Virginia Tech freshman. We know that they were friends. We do not know a lot about their relationship beyond that, at least not according to the research that we did. She certainly came into play when David decided that rather than end this relationship with Nicole in a responsible way, which was basically to say, thank you, I'm no longer interested, David decided that really the only way that he could think of to end this relationship was to murder Nicole.
This whole thing crosses the line into insanity at some point. Here we have these two young people, and again, these are both students at Virginia Tech. These are very smart young people. Natalie Keepers is 20 and David's 18. They're both freshmen. Interestingly, they're both from Maryland. He's from Columbia, Maryland, and she's from Laurel, Maryland. As you mentioned, we don't think, or it's not been reported, that they had a romantic relationship. It sounds like they were friends. Natalie seems to be promoting this idea of the way to break off this inappropriate relationship with this 13-year-old is to kill her, as opposed to just saying what he should have said the first time he met her, certainly face-to-face. David should have told Nicole, I'm sorry, you're a little kid. I can't do this. Go home to your mama. And that didn't happen. But somehow in the twisted mind of David Eisenhower and Natalie Keepers, we end up this long gestating plot to kill this young girl.
And this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision on their part to lure Nicole out of her house and murder her. It was something that they had clearly been thinking about for quite a bit of time. And this is something that was established during the trial by the prosecution based on text messages between David and Natalie. It is based on the fact that they went out and bought shovels and cleaning supplies. I know. Bill is grimacing, and as am I. This was clearly something that they had thought of for a while.
Let's continue this conversation after a short break. We're back here on Mind Over Murder, talking about the murder of Nicole Madison Lovell, age 13.
So the sequence of events happens like this. Nicole went missing sometime between midnight and 7 a.m. on Wednesday, January 27th. Her mother, Tammy Weeks, went into her room and found that her nightstand had been pushed up against the door.
So she's more or less barricaded the door to her room.
Probably so that mom couldn't get in, yeah. And her window was open, so we know that that's how she got out.
And it's winter.
It is winter, yeah. It's January 27th. So apparently, to keep herself from getting cold, she wrapped herself up in her blue Minions blanket. And that's the part that really just kind of gets me.
And it's a reminder that this is actually a child.
She is, yeah. This is a 13-year-old girl. And she, even though she had said on Facebook that she had a secret date with a college boy named David that night, she took her blue blanket with her Minions on it. She wrapped it around herself. I do want to note that while she did take her Minions blanket, the one thing that she did not take, which really set off alarm bells for her parents, was the anti-rejection drugs that she had to take as a result of her liver transplant.
So these are life-saving drugs. In other words, she had to take these every day.
Yes.
Probably for the rest of her life because she'd had this liver transplant.
Absolutely. And I do remember when she disappeared, all the press conferences in which her parents basically pled for her to come home, thinking maybe she had run away on her own, and saying, honey, we know you need your medicine. We need you to come home. They continually emphasized that probably at this point, when her disappearance stretched out into days and days, that she was probably very sick and that she needed to come home to get her anti-rejection medication.
And this was treated as a missing person, a missing child case from the start.
Yes, absolutely.
And there were multiple agencies involved in searching for her because this was put out as missing child who needs medication, has left her home under circumstances that they did not know about at that point.
Absolutely. So they did, a full court press on this. So the agencies that were involved were the Blacksburg Police, the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, the Christiansburg Police, the City of Radford Police, the Virginia Tech Police, the Virginia State Police, and the FBI, because she was a minor. All of these were together combing the area for Nicole. They even used a drone, like a heat-seeking drone to see if they could find her in some of the dense underbrush and up in the mountains. I mean, everybody was committed to finding this, this missing child and bringing her back home.
And for the benefit of our listeners that might not be familiar with how the FBI work, the FBI gets involved in cases where it's a child that is someone who's under 18 years old or there's an apparent abduction. Now, they didn't know exactly what had happened to Nicole at this point, but the FBI was involved from the word go in an assist role to help all of these different agencies in that area search for this missing girl.
Now, one of the things that the FBI did, and which they are very good at, and Bill, you were marking on this last night, is they figured very quickly that they needed to learn about this young girl's online presence. And so they sent to Kik, one of the many platforms that she was on, what they called an emergency disclosure request. And according to the Kik spokesman, Rod McLeod, a emergency disclosure request involves, quote, releasing certain account information to law enforcement agencies for cases that involve imminent threat of death, loss of security, or serious physical injury to any person.
And any of those things could have applied in the Nicole Lovell disappearance at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So when the FBI was able to access her Kik account, they saw that she had been messaging with this Dr. Tombstone quite frequently for the last 2 days of her life. And that clearly seemed to be the best lead that they had, I would assume.
Well, and of course, it's probably worth talking about digital fingerprints at this point, because I know that the two perpetrators, I'm including both David Eisenhower and Natalie Keepers in this as we get into more detail, but they seem to take steps to cover their tracks, as I know you'll get into, but they fail to understand that all of this digital contact that we all have with each other is completely traceable. So emails and texts and these messages via the Kik and other apps, which are supposedly anonymous, none of this stuff is anonymous. And by the way, we're not here to help anybody get away with murder, but amazing that these two smart young people at Virginia Tech didn't realize that their trail of digital contacts with emails and texts and phone calls and Facebook messages and the other apps, Kik seems to be the one that was the most pivotal to this case, but that the FBI was able to put together a digital trail that led directly to David's apartment. And they were able to identify him. I might have said apartment. I think it's actually a dorm.
It was his dorm, yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah. To his dorm room. They knew exactly who they were looking for in a matter of a day or two.
Yeah, they used the IP address and traced it back to his dorm room and found him. So on Saturday, January 30th, the Blacksburg police arrested David Eisenhower. There is an excellent special on this case from 48 Hours that we were watching last night, and there's an interview with his roommate who said that he was turned away from his room by the Virginia State Police and the FBI, and they told him, oh, don't worry, we're not here for you, we're here for your roommate.
Yeah, so they knew exactly who they were looking for, and in a very, very short period of time.
Yeah, I remind my students all the time, the internet is forever, guys. It is forever.
And just because you deleted something on your phone or other device doesn't mean that it doesn't reside elsewhere. It's almost like they hadn't heard of the Patriot Act.
Well, on Saturday, January 30th, David Eisenhower was arrested. And during his discussion with police, he threw out the name Natalie Keepers. He basically told the police, well, yes, I bought a shovel at Walmart for snow shoveling purposes. You can ask my friend Natalie Keepers. She was there with me.
And by the way, the video of the two of them making their purchases at Walmart was immediately available to the FBI. So these two geniuses are leaving a trail of digital fingerprints literally all over town.
Absolutely. They did go. Natalie Keepers did eventually, during her interviews with police, lead them around to every single location that they went to in Blacksburg and Christiansburg, both to buy their materials, cleaning supplies, shovel, but also to every other place where they dropped belongings or dumped cell phone cases. They were everywhere. And we tend to forget now that there are video cameras everywhere.
Say, unlike the Colonial Parkway murders 30 plus years ago, where there really wasn't a lot of video. This comes out a lot when I speak about the case to college-age audiences who obviously are significantly younger and have grown up in an environment where there are cameras seemingly everywhere. Back then, you could make your way from point A to point B often without being recorded. That's increasingly difficult if you're near any kind of commercial entity.
This is the part that I hate talking about. Nicole Lovell was eventually found. She was found just past the North Carolina border in Surry County off of Route 89. That's about 99 miles from Blacksburg if you take 81 south and 77 south. So it takes, less than 2 hours to get there. She was found dumped on the side of the road, almost as if she was thrown out of a car. She was naked. Her body had been scrubbed with bleach and cleaning supplies. I assume they were thinking that was a forensic countermeasure. And she had been dumped like garbage on the side of the road.
What I find shocking, in addition to just the absolutely horrible way they treated this young woman and her body, was they took measures to hide their trail from a scientific perspective, and yet we're leaving this digital trail all over the place with virtually every contact that David in particular had with Natalie and with a friend of his who was kind of a confidant, a digital friend actually. They'd never met of more than 6 years, but he was asking the friend, how do I dispose of a body?
Where's a good place to hide a body? Yeah.
The whole thing is just insane. So they took steps to obscure evidence in terms of where they left Nicole's body beside the road. And our understanding is that the road does have some significance for David. It's on the way to his grandmother's house.
Now, they did dispose of other evidence. They dropped Nicole's backpack into the New River. They tossed her cell phone case out the side of the road, or out the car window when they were on the highway. They dropped the knife in the woods. So Natalie Keepers did eventually take the police officers around to every single location and point out to them, here's where I dropped this, here's where we dropped that, here's where we did this thing. So they really did clearly think that they were taking some good forensic countermeasures here. But as you said, Bill, they're leaving a digital footprint a mile wide.
The murder weapon itself was never found. That was a knife, they believe, that was used. How was Nicole killed?
She died of stab wounds to her chest, her neck, and her head, 14 in all. All told, according to the medical examiner, there was a bruise on her forehead. There were fractured vertebrae. There were 6 stab wounds to her head, 8 stab wounds to her chest, and the fatal injury was a stab wound to the left side of her neck.
And as far as we know, David Eisenhower is the perpetrator, and Natalie Marie Keepers seems to be in the sort of encouraging category. She was very wrapped up in this thing and was pushing him forward, but was not actually there at the time of the murder.
And he asserted, of course, that he had nothing to do with Nicole Lovell's death. He said he didn't kill her, he didn't touch her. Clearly, that is not accurate.
But he didn't present an alternative theory as to who did.
No. And their stories changed over time, as stories are wont to do. But he
particularly when you're lying.
Yeah, absolutely. But he said he had nothing to do with it. And Natalie, when she was asked, said, "Well, Eisenhower did it. He murdered her all by himself." So you've got competing stories. According to Natalie Keepers, David's motivation for this whole entire thing was his concern that Nicole had gotten pregnant.
Which strongly implies there was sexual contact at one of their earlier meetings, despite the fact that he originally claimed that he'd only met her once.
Yeah, exactly. Again, we've got a nice tissue of lies here that you can pretty easily see through once you get to the heart of the matter. He told...
I like that expression, tissue of lies.
Tissue of lies. He apparently told Natalie at one point that he, and this is a quote here, he may have had sex with Lovell at a party, but he couldn't remember it because he blacked out and woke up in a ditch.
And if anyone's buying that story, we've got some very nice bridges to sell you.
Gosh, So Natalie really is the person who spent the greatest amount of time with police trying to come clean of the whole entire thing.
As it were.
And
she's just about as dirty as he is on this one.
She really, truly is. Ultimately, some parts of her confession were ruled inadmissible in court. The terminology that was used was there were improper interrogation techniques involved. I'm not entirely sure what that means. My research did not turn that up. Yeah, Bill, do you have any idea?
Well, I mean, that can be anything from, not being advised of your rights, or that there was something, some technique was used that was somehow bordered on illegal. I mean, clearly they interrogated her for a number of hours, and I'm not sure exactly where they crossed the line. Fortunately for all of us, there were rulings that did allow most of what was had to say to be admissible, because obviously this is pivotal to the next phase of this story, which we'll want to get into in our next episode, which is the trial. It's actually trials of both David Edmund Eisenhower and Natalie Marie Keepers.
Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Sources used for this week's episode include
reporting from CBS News, the Collegiate Times, Inside Edition, the Mercury News, the Radford News Journal, the Roanoke Times, and the Washington Post.
Finally, we strongly recommend an episode which is very helpful to us in putting together this podcast, CBS News Special 48 Hours Killer App. It covers both the Nicole Madison Lovell case as well as a very interesting case that took place in Spokane, Washington, involving the attempted abduction of a 15-year-old girl by a 30-year-old man she had also met on the Kick app, and we strongly recommend it.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.